From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
It was a splat scene round the world. What exactly was that landed on the president's coat during a trip to Iowa?
Coming up, we'll take a look at your planting outlook in just a bit.
After testing positive for COVID, we hear from the Secretary of Agriculture about how he's doing and his thoughts on E15 sales this summer.
There's a real desire and interest for this. Why? Because it offers the customer a lower cost option.
As the war in Ukraine continues to push up prices around the world.
The war is starting at one of the worst times.
Now organizations say urgent action is needed to help feed people. That's right now on AgDay. Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Energy prices, urgent financial need, and food insecurity. It's a triple threat facing some of the world's poorest nations. That's according to a joint statement from the World Bank, the IMF, and WTO. And they are making an urgent call to action right now. As David McKenzie reports, the war in Ukraine is only making things worse.
The early starts and the intense work at the Phillips Atakele bakery in Lagos used to be worth it, used to be profitable.
Since early this year, precisely around the time of the bombing of Ukraine, which has affected the supply of yeast, which has affected our primary item of our production, which is the white wheat flour. Our flour has been very expensive. The prices are changing constantly.
Now they can only afford to produce half of what they did, and each tin gets less dough. This war is horrifying for Ukraine's people. It could be devastating for global food security. Russia and Ukraine are agricultural export powerhouses. On the field of battle, farmers will struggle to plant crops. With export ports blockaded by Russian warships, it has pushed the prices even higher. So the 10 hours Mariam Adegoke spends selling bread won't be enough to feed her 2 children. She says customers don't have the cash anymore. They often refuse to pay the going rate. And even on the fertile slopes of Mount Kenya, they are hurting. Caroline Kimarua had to slash her workforce. The cost of fertilizer for her tea and coffee plantations has doubled in recent months.
You have no money to buy that fertilizer at that high cost.
And Russia is one of the world's biggest fertilizer producers. Sanctions and trade disruptions are likely to push prices even higher. Could this be any worse timed?
The war is starting at one of the worst times because we were already thinking we are in a recovery mode. On top of that, there were already inflation pressures that were across the world. Africans are spending a lot on fuel and spending a lot on food. Then in these current moment, this is a tough time for the continent.
The impact of this conflict is coming on top of already soaring global grain prices. And if you look at this map over here, of course, countries across the world could feel the pain, but economists point to specific African countries like Senegal, which imports more than 50% of its wheat from Ukraine and Russia, and Somalia, which imports more than 90%. And in Somalia, already suffering from generational drought, hundreds of thousands of children, like 7-month-old Arden, are hollowed out by hunger and sickness. If the rains fail again, the war in Europe could push this crisis into a catastrophe, even into famine. Aid agencies depend heavily on grain from Ukraine. David McKenzie, CNN London.
David McKenzie reporting. World Bank warns that for each percentage point increase in food prices, 10 million people are thrown into extreme poverty worldwide. Also threatening to cause global shockwaves, COVID lockdowns in China. Shanghai is easing rules that confine most of its 25 million people to their homes, but other cities are cutting off access or closing factories and schools. Last week, it was reported that at least 44 cities in the country were under full or partial lockdowns. People in a neighboring city to Shanghai rushed to supermarkets to stock up on food amid surging coronavirus cases reported from the city. You can see this supermarket was crowded with long lines along with rows of empty shelves. Despite China's zero COVID policy, it's logged more than 350,000 new infections since early last month. Speaking of COVID, the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture said he's feeling pretty good with minimal symptoms, just, quote, living in his basement after testing positive last week. The Secretary making those comments to AgriTalk's Chip Flory during an appearance on the program. Now, Vilsack also discussing a number of things, including the recent progress to allow U.S. potatoes to be shipped to Mexico, as well as preserving yellow corn exports. When asked about access to the Canadian dairy market under USMCA, Vilsack says he's frustrated with what appears to be a shell game and a lack of full transparency. Then there was the president's announcement to allow E15 to be sold through the summer.
This is an important step in terms of trying to bring costs down for folks at the pump. If the president had not made that decision, June 1, we would have seen 2,300 stations across the country that would have put the bag on the pump, and there would not have been access to E15. Now we have access during the summer months, which is a good thing.
USDA following that up with additional investments. That includes $5.6 million for blender pumps and infrastructure in 7 states, another $100 million for upgrades to fueling systems to help distribute higher ethanol blends, and Vilsack says that the $700 million set aside for biofuel assistance during the pandemic, that money will be paid at the end of April. Now, last week, President Biden announcing plans to allow gasoline with 15% ethanol to be sold during the summer. The Renewable Fuels Association says that should increase E15 consumption by about 300 million gallons, pushing it above 1 billion gallons for the year. The White House says the E15 decision will also increase corn demand by 25 to 45 million bushels. Of course, not all stations have the infrastructure or the pumps to sell E15 blends. Whether or not they choose to make the investment could depend on if EPA approves E15 for sale year-round permanently. After last week's wild weather, farmers will be anxious this week to get out and start planting. Meteorologist Matt Yurosavik joins us, and Matt, the week is starting out a bit quieter.
Yeah, that's right, Clinton. As we start off this week, a lot quieter than all of those storms that moved through last week, and we are going to be seeing more of a zonal pattern here with at least the start of the week here with regards to our jet stream. But as we kind of go through the week, you're going to notice a little bit of cooler air moving into the upper Great Lakes there and into the Northeast. That'll bring a shot of cooler air, but eventually by the second half of the week, we'll start to see a big ridge forming in the middle of the country. That's going to bring back the warmth, and that's going to bring back quieter weather along with it while keeping it a little bit more active out towards the west coast. So if we look at temperatures this week, above normal there, Four Corners region up through the middle part of the country, but staying below average through the upper Great Lakes, the Midwest, and down through the Southeast, as well as the West Coast, and above normal in some places out west where we really need some of that rain, as well as southern parts of Texas and parts of New Mexico, and then staying below average over in the east where we saw a lot of rain over the last couple of weeks with all of those rounds of severe storms. And we're going to take a deeper look into this coming up in your planting outlook, that coming up in just a little bit. And it's not just farmers in the U.S. dealing with calving in heavy snow and brutal cold temperatures as of late. Cameron in Douglas, Manitoba sharing this video. He says there were 8-foot snow drifts on the shelters that they had to shovel off. A lot of work, but you can see it was well worth it. I'll have more on your forecast coming up.
Avian influenza cases across the U.S. are now outpacing the 2014-2015 U.S. outbreak. That's according to the American Farm Bureau Federation. And it warns it may be due to better detection and reporting protocols. Now, according to AFBF's Market Intel, there are more than 600 confirmed cases of the highly pathogenic avian influenza in wild birds covering 31 states. There are also 158 confirmed cases in commercial and backyard flocks across 25 states. Turkey and egg layers are being hit the hardest by the latest outbreaks. So far, it's estimated only 4% of broilers have been impacted. The countries are still trying to buy grain from the Black Sea region, but getting it is costly. We'll have details next. And later, what exactly hit the president during his speech in Iowa? It's something many livestock feeders will recognize. Details in the country.
AgDay is brought to you by Germinator Closing Wheels. Germinator, it's not just any closing wheel. Reach your yield potential. Free shipping on all orders with coupon code AgDay.
Joining us today, we've got Joe Vaklovic with Standard Grain. Joe, as we talk about this wheat market, obviously the situation over in Ukraine is starting to be felt in some of our global markets here.
Yeah, it's had a huge impact. Egypt is essentially the world's largest importer of wheat, and they just made their first big purchase on the international market this week since before the invasion. They paid 44% more, I believe, on average, was the price for the wheat imported into Egypt. So this invasion, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, has had a phenomenal impact on the price of physical wheat moving to countries that actually need it. You know, countries like Egypt, there are countries in Africa that are heavily reliant on the Black Sea and those sort of places. So it kind of highlights what this Russia situation has done. It's going to cause food concern issues, food security issues. There's going to be countries who become more and more and more concerned with food security. And you hope it doesn't get to the point where there are shortages, because that means starvation and death and really terrible things. And I don't know that we're to that point yet, but it may not take as long as you think.
Joe, as we look at kind of global supplies here, obviously the U.S., pretty big grower, not as many acres as we used to have. What did the global supply situation look like? Or is there wheat here in the U.S. to ship?
There's wheat, but we're not priced competitively. And as a matter of fact, USDA reduced its wheat export forecast in its most recent report. So on May, I believe it's 12th, USDA provides us with their first new crop balance sheet projections for corn, for soybeans, and for wheat. They have a near impossible task when you're trying to project what the supply and demand situation will be for wheat, for corn, I mean, even for soybeans at this point. But how do you even begin to project what the impact of this Ukraine-Russia situation will be? How do you pencil in a Ukraine export number or a Russia export number or even a Ukrainian production number for corn? It's just an impossible task, and it's going to be something that changes every single month, I think, as this thing unfolds.
Absolutely. A big world. We're all pretty tied together here, Joe. Appreciate it. Thank you as always. We'll be back with more AgDay coming up in just a minute.
For more information about Standard Grain and its services, call Joe at 312-462-4438. Find farm equipment on Machinery Pete's April 19th online auction. No reserve, no buyer fees. Start bidding now at auctions.machinerypete.com.
Meteorologist Matt Yurosavik joining us here. And Matt, it's that time of year when we really get the planters rolling in earnest. The question is, what is the growing season going to look like this year?
Yeah, so we want to take a kind of a wider look from May all the way through August. But to do that, we've got to start by looking at where we're at right now. And the first thing we want to look at is our root zone, and this coming out just at the end of last week, showing you that still we're going to see a lot of moisture, still some very damp soil here all the way down the Mississippi and even up into parts of Wisconsin and Michigan as well. But you notice parts of the East Coast still very, very dry, parts of Ohio down into Pennsylvania and into the Carolinas, parts of Florida as well. But then once we head back closer to southern parts of Louisiana, Texas has been a big area of drought over the last couple of months. Western portions of Oklahoma, Kansas up to Nebraska now very, very dry there, and all the way up into the Dakotas and back towards the west. Again, we've been dealing with these dry conditions lately. But we're also seeing a little bit of moisture there in the northern parts of the mountains there, parts of Washington state. So this is kind of where we're at right now with soil moisture. But here's a look at that drought, and it kind of mirrors it. A lot of moisture has been seen here across the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys, some drier spots over in the East Coast and Southeast as well as Florida. But then from southern parts of Louisiana into Texas, this is really where we're getting into the major drought conditions there. And then back towards the west, San Joaquin Valley, big planting area. As we head through the summer months, it looks like it may stay dry back there, as well as up into the Cascades. So that's a look at the latest drought monitor, and how we've got here is actually from our La Nina pattern, which is starting to weaken. But basically that keeps a lot of moisture likely in parts of the Great Lakes and interior parts of the mid-Atlantic states and the Northeast, staying cooler in the north, with more precipitation back in the northwest. But south of where that jet stream dips through, we're much warmer and drier as well. And that would be where all those drought conditions have come from back in the west. So this pattern's starting to weaken, which could be meaning some signs of change. But here's a look at our summer temperature forecast. This covers May through August. So if we look at this as the country as a whole, most of the country, lower 48, above normal with regards to those temperatures, keeping it normal though right along the northern tier back into the Pacific Northwest. And if we look well above normal there from the Four Corners region along the Gulf Coast and up into parts of the mid-Atlantic states, that includes Florida as well. Then if we look at our summer precipitation forecast, again from May to August, keeping it above normal from the Great Lakes through the mid-Atlantic states, parts of New England thrown in there as well, and then also back towards parts of Mexico, Arizona, and New Mexico, maybe seeing above average precipitation, but still below normal. Through a good portion of the center of the country, big area there is going to be staying likely in those drought conditions, which are highlighted here in the red. And you can see where we've outlined the major growing areas, soy and corn right up through this area, wheat through the center of the country, and the San Joaquin Valley as well. So these are all things that we're going to continue to monitor here, and we'll bring you those updates right here on Ag Day. That's a look around the country. Now let's take a look at the weather where you live. Wakefield, Virginia, mostly cloudy and a few showers, a high of 61 degrees. Duncan, Oklahoma, lots of sunshine and staying warm, a high of 71. And Marysville, California, partly cloudy with evening showers, a high of 70 degrees.
Hey, stay tuned, folks. Coming up, I'm going to tell you about a tractor that sold last week in South Dakota. Unbelievable.
And later, the drop seen round the world. What exactly hit the president's suit during his speech in Iowa? Details in the country. How do you describe the current used farm machinery market? Well, Machinery Pete says you might have to go back to school.
Well, folks, I did not train as a writer. I was actually an accounting major back in the ice age of the late 1980s. Data and numbers, kind of my sweet spot, as I'm sure you can tell over the years. But I tell you what, I think I need to go back to school and get me a new bag of adjectives, because trying to describe this current farm equipment market, it's just unprecedented. Now, the latest example I can give you from an online farm auction last Thursday in Presho, South Dakota, by our good friends at Sullivan Auctioneers. Check this out. 2012 John Deere 9560R four-wheel drive, 543 hours, so yes, crazy low hours on a 10-year-old tractor, but it sold for $356,000. Now, folks, if you go check out our auction prices at machinerypete.com, you'll see that's a record by $68,500. Just incredible. And then let's go to the sprayer on that auction last Thursday, this 2013 Case Age Patriot 4430. Again, super low hours, only 379 hours. So it's like new, 9 years old. It sold for $300,000. That is $64,000 above the previous record price on a 4430 sprayer. So in this environment, folks, if you think you know what used values are, they are changing by the day. So go to machinerypete.com, click on our free auction prices, and stay up to date on what this market is doing.
President Biden announced E15 summer sales last week in Iowa, but it's not necessarily the announcement that caused this scene in Iowa to go viral. Details next in the country. Did you happen to see this during President Biden's speech last week in Menlo, Iowa at the Poet ethanol plant? Something dropping on the lapel of his suit. Now take a closer look. Something goes splat right there on the lapel of his coat. That sent the internet into high gear. What was that? Some theorized it was bird droppings, and that, of course, set off a firestorm. Now, the White House communications director even posting a message on Twitter about it, saying, quote, "If you guys knew your way around a corn silo at all, you know it was corn." Now, the president was standing right next to a giant pile of processed corn while he spoke. It was, in fact, distillers' dried grains with solubles, or DDGs. You can see it lands with a dusty drop. Renewable Fuels Association President and CEO Jeff Cooper was an eyewitness there in the distillers' grains barn with the president, and he confirmed it was definitely DDGs responsible for spotting the president's suit. And that's going to wrap us up. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day on Farm Country.